This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. We are talking about balancing action with non-action in your stories, and this is going to go a couple of different ways, giving your characters a chance to rest as part of the story, and also using narrative to give your readers a chance to rest and finding that balance. So to help us get a handle on what we mean, let's start by giving an example of the problem. Robert, I think you had something in mind.
Yeah, if you're reading a book where there's action scene after scene after scene, where there's fights and swords and guns, and somehow your protagonist is making their way through it, but your heart rate's up, you're sweating, you think, wow, what's happening here? But it just doesn't let up, and it goes like that through many chapters. After a while, that can be really wearing as a reader, and I know as a writer, I'm also a little guilty of that. I tend to write first drafts with dialogue and action, and have to go back and sort of seed in the reflective moments and to a certain degree description. So yeah, and it can happen the other way around, of course, is that you go for several chapters and you're in some character's head and not much is happening, and that can be frustrating as well. So I guess that's what I was meaning, that sort of balance, as both narrative drive and from the reader's point of view, when too much action can be just ruins a book.
Right. Yeah, it can be exhausting as well as unrealistic. Yeah,
and actually also the thing that brought this to mind was I've forgotten his name now. Is it Stein on writing, who talks about the sort of scene sequence idea, or scene sequel, where the scene has the goal, the conflict, disaster, and then the sequel part of it has the reflection, plan, decision type of thing. And that helped me balance out, but it's a very mechanical way of doing it. Sometimes I am aware of that when I'm in revision. I'm thinking, okay, this seems to be, oh yeah, that's right. They haven't had time to stop and consider what the next thing should be. The characters lacking their agency, is being driven by action. Anyway,
yes.
I'll stop now.
Yeah, no, that was a really good point. Scenes do have sort of a natural arc to them, and it can be mechanical, or it can feel mechanical when you're writing it and you're aware of that. But if you don't include that arc, then you end up with these problems of imbalance that we're talking about. And the arc is basically introduce some action, progress and evolve that action, escalate it to some sort of climactic moment, and then you need to resolve that action and then introduce new action. So that resolution and introduction of new action is where we get those down beats in the momentum of the story, where the characters get to regroup, recover, rest, reconsider, think of all those things you need to do in your downtime that sort of finish one thing and prepare you for another thing. And for us writers and readers, we're concluding a movement and introducing a new movement. So that's the purpose of those moments.
Right, yeah. So I was thinking as you were explaining that, in thinking sort of metaphorically, like waves on a beach, or a piece of what we're used to in terms of, say, classical music pieces, where there are going to be climactic moments, but then there are also moments of a balance within the musical piece. So I guess if you think about it like other pieces of art like that, then that's a way. I mean, because there are times, obviously, like a musical climax, where you want to string a whole load of action together without letting either the character or the reader rest, because it's part of what you're aiming to achieve in that particular story.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
You end up with ear fatigue in music, like that. All you end up when there's so much noise. And so it's probably very similar as a reader, you end up fatigued. Mentally fatigued. I can't keep up with all of this stuff, or just like, I don't care anymore because the character is constantly doing a certain level of action or whatever.
And in an early draft of one of my stories that I got some feedback on, and it was excellent feedback. It was very positive. It wasn't sort of a negative thing. It was, wow, this character's just got endless energy. She handles whatever's thrown at her. Yeah, okay, right. Yeah, I probably should sort of adjust that a little bit to at least make sure that suspension of disbelief didn't trigger in other people.
Right.
While this person was willing to entertain it, maybe not everybody is.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And just think of art reflecting or mirroring life. And so just as you in real life need to take a break after some kind of strenuous exertion, so do your characters. And even though you can cut a lot of that out of your story using scene breaks and chapter breaks, using that white space as a jump cut, you do need to keep in mind the reader's fatigue and the noise, as Kathryn was talking about, that you can create to your detriment, to your story's detriment. And, it will lessen your reader's enjoyment and also could damage that suspension of disbelief that you mentioned, Robert, if you don't build in some of those moments, but besides just giving a rest to your characters and your readers, this is where you get to introduce new movements in the story. Shift the focus from main plot to subplot, bring in a character we need to revisit, give your protagonist a chance to do some legwork or, uncover something new, whatever, depending on your genre and your story.
Yeah, or use the quiet times to stir in a plot twist, or so it's not necessarily action driven, but it can be coincidence driven, for example, as opposed to the protagonist's main the agency that they're driving the story with. So I think I'm obviously aware that the poor way to do it, we go, okay, I've had loads of action, now I need to have a downtime. Let's have the characters, sitting around on the couch watching TV and eating some bacon and eggs.
Right.
If it doesn't progress the story, there's no point in having the downtime.
Exactly.
Your downtime doesn't need to be sleeping the night or having a meal or some of those.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. That whatever your downtime looks like physically, whether that's going back home and, soaking your aching feet or putting a bandage on your wound or, tucking your child into bed or whatever it looks like physically, there needs to be something else layered in to that scene. It could be part of the character's emotional arc. It could be planning something, so set up for the next movement of action. It could be making some kind of decision, that agency piece. Not everything we do is a choice to act. Sometimes it's a reflective decision, like, do I stay in this relationship? Do I, quit my job? Do I, whatever?
Right.
Yeah. I was just noticing every choice I could come up with was like, should I stay or should I go? there are more examples.
There are lots of decisions that your characters could be making or things they could be thinking about or reflecting on or moving into or out of. Yeah. I mean, exactly. When you think about it, even when you're in the middle of something that feels like it's taking over your life, there is still a lot of other life going on around you. Right. And so you can take that moment away from the main conflict and have stuff still happening that's interesting and matters to your protagonist,
right,
without it being life or death or the high stakes high tension moment that we just came out of.
Yes, and you can also use these moments to shift the focus from action to narrative and build mood, add some ambiance to the scene. Something that has come to mind, for who knows what reason, is Blade Runner with Harrison Ford. And there's this scene where he's been, out chasing the replicants or whatever, and he comes home and he's beat up and he sits down and he has a drink in a square glass and he puts it up to drink, and some blood from his cut lip goes into the liquor in the glass. And it's this very quiet, subtle moment. And it's, we aren't in his head hearing his thoughts, but we see him pausing. And we know he's thinking about his work, what's happening, piecing together clues, how he just, got beat up, whatever. But the moment is all about that visual rest, the quiet of it. Seeing that blood go into the glass is powerful. It's been years since I saw that movie. So we can do the same thing with words. We don't even have to go into the character's head and go, what is he thinking? What is he planning? What is he, right? It doesn't have to be narrative driven in that sense. It could just be show that quiet moment, add some detail that's going to just stick with your reader.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. There could be symbolic things in there as well that you pick up and use later on. And maybe this is why it's nice to have the awareness of it, but I should probably not let it be anxiety inducing during first draft.
Right.
Because when you go back and realize that there's an imbalance, say, with action and whatever, rest for the reader or rest for the character, it does give you the opportunity to say, okay, well, what else can I layer and seed into the story that's already in my head, and it's already part of what I'm trying to construct, that just enriches it, and I choose to use a quiet moment for that, because I think when you read a great story, often that's one of the things that's why that the aha moments that you get when you're reading a great novel and don't always happen in the midst of action. They can happen in those sort of the space between the scenes, almost. What the author implies, or what the character, you kind of get what the character's going through.
Yeah, and I would say they primarily happen in the space between action, because in action we're focused on the movement, the physicality, the exertion, the progression of the main plot. Right. So it's in those quiet moments, narrative moments, that everybody gets to kind of pull back from the action, take a breath, and do some processing and some absorbing.
Okay, so maybe then the clue is if I'm revising and I'm seeing that there's action, and no fallout, what we're trying to do is action should always have some kind of consequence or fallout, and that has to play itself through somewhere, not necessarily immediately adjacent to that particular piece of action. I mean, you can be seeding things for opening a loop for later closing.
Right.
So a good way to think about it as well.
Yeah, and structurally, if you're working with something like Scrivener, use the little note cards, and when you revise, go through each chapter and say, is this an action chapter? Does it have reflective moments? Make notes, color code it, and then you can see, okay, I've just had like 5 heavy action chapters without taking that rest in a row. I'd better not go more than, say, 2 chapters without putting in that break and giving the character and the reader both that pause to assimilate everything that has just been happening. If you just do action, you can sort of overload the amount of information, settings, movement, physicality. It's so much to absorb, and it's going to blur together. But if you give us those downbeats to, take it in and breathe with it for a minute, then it's going to become more memorable, because it's sort of contained in a movement of the story instead of just being like boom, 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 all slammed together.
Right. I'm thinking of like action movies now, and like things where we think about there needs to be a ton of action, or like, maybe genres that feel like they need to have a ton of action. And I'm going to use Minority Report right now because it's such a good movie. Sorry, that's my own personal bias. But I saw it recently, and like even when he's being chased, because he pretty much, you start that first plot point, he's now a fugitive, and he's a fugitive through the whole until the very end of the movie. There are still moments where the tension ratchets down, even though he's still a fugitive. And I think that's sometimes so hard as a writer, like for myself, to think, oh, but they're being chased, that means they have to be running. But even though he's running, there's moments where he's like getting his eyes replaced. Like, weird tension and stakes, but you have a moment of where you feel like he's safe for the moment, and you get to, see what's going on, and, what that means to him internally. And anyway, so it's just interesting, like, even in some of these genres where we think it must be action all the time, exploding cars and crazy things going on. Like, you have those moments where even if it's a false sense of security, it's a sense of, okay, now I can move on. So,
definitely.
Yeah, in the good ones anyway, I think, for sure.
Right.
The low level action adventure sort of style things, they can just be shoot 'em up car chase, and I mean, I guess there's a place for that in movies, but the ones that are memorable, where we feel the craft more, or we identify with the characters, like the Blade Runner or good old Tom, it's because we've vicariously experienced those moments with them.
Right. Well, and also, you need those moments to help the reader connect with and empathize with the characters. So if you just have a plastic action hero who's, punching people and shooting guns and driving cars and whatever, when do we get a chance to get to know that character and enjoy and relate to that character? Right. So it's in these moments where we get to take a breath, where we see more facets of the person than just the action hero.
Right.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, even look at something as popular as the Jack Reacher series. You still get to know Reacher. You understand, what drives him. And at the end of the day, he's just a guy who muscles into town, rescues the underdogs, and beats the crap out of people. But if it was just that, they would be just pulpy sort of magazine style stories. But clearly they attract a wider audience, I think, because you do end up getting into Reacher's head, even though he doesn't have a massive arc.
Right.
He still thinks about stuff, and he still gets annoyed with things, and you can't do that if you're always just punching the living daylights out of someone.
Well, you know why he's punching the living daylights out of someone.
That's right.
And
that's important. Yeah, motivation, it counts.
Well, and that's what you get in the quieter moments too, because you don't necessarily know, in the middle of an action scene, your character's not going to stop and be like, this is why I'm doing this.
Right.
They're just going to pull through. And, if you don't have that set up beforehand, then your reader's not going to care.
Well, that's the other side of the mistake, isn't it? That's right. Is you think, I've got to balance the action out here, and you balance it out right at the wrong moments. where the sword's at someone's neck, and all of a sudden they're into the moral thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, we probably don't want to do that.
No.
Flashback.
I know, yes, right? Flashback.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I think you'll upset your readers.
And taking the balance the other way as well. Sometimes I get into, we've had a heavy action sequence. This is in first draft again. And this has just happened to me where I'm in the middle of something at the moment. And I'm writing. And I look at it and I think, oh my God, I've just gone 2,000 words and all they've done is talk. They've just sat around and talked about what's going on, and there's too much of it. And so I know that when I go back and revise, I'm probably going to have to break that up. It might only need an action beat or something, but or it might only need an interruption or an intrusion or as you say, a scene break or something just gets chopped out. But it's interesting. I find myself, if I'm writing the downtime, sometimes I can go too down as well. So
yeah, that can happen. And when it does happen in my writing, I feel I don't enjoy writing it because I feel like I can sense it's off, and it's almost like I'm bored with the idea of the scene, and this was just happening to me. And I was like, okay, I know the purpose of this scene. I need this ghost to attach to the supporting character and follow her home. And I need, we're going to learn this thing about the supporting character. And I was trying to figure out why I wasn't able to write the scene. It just felt like sludge.
Yeah.
So I did some journaling and realized the scene was all about the supporting character. And of course, the protagonist, Jess, is the one the readers empathize with. She's the one with the character arc we care about. And I had to get more depth into the scene that relates specifically to her in order to give the scene more momentum, more meaning, and it's still going to be a quiet scene, a conversation-based scene, but it can't be just that, because the reader wants to attach to something. What's the reader's takeaway? Well, yeah, the stuff with the supporting character, that's part of it, but it's not enough. So, we need to look at, where does the reader's empathy lie? What is moving forward with the protagonist in this scene? And then, you can create that balance and create a conversation or quiet scene that still works for you.
Yeah, it sounds like you sort of, reviewed where the spotlight was and turned it back onto the protagonist. I mean, it's not quite the right analogy, because obviously you could just shine the camera on a supporting character, and it's not just as simple as shining the camera, pointing the camera back at the protagonist. There's got to be movement and, as you say, some kind of scene arc in there as well. But it's a good realization to have, that you think, oh, hang on a minute, the reason why this scene was boring is because it was all about some supporting character, and it didn't need to be.
Right. Well, and also the protagonist is the only point of view character I'm working with.
Okay,
and so to write a scene that's focused on a supporting character, but it's all coming through the lens of the protagonist, it wasn't working, so I needed to give the scene more punch in terms of their dialogue and, action, but they're still basically having a conversation. Nobody's going to get up and throw a punch or something, or, start a fire. But so I needed more punch, more action, more impact that way. But I also needed to give the scene a focus that has to do with the point of view character that gives us forward momentum in her trajectory, because that's the trajectory of the whole book. You need to keep that focus in place as well. So
subplots are still only relevant as they come back to the protagonist. Your subplot with your supporting character is only going to matter if it matters to that protagonist.
Right. So in terms of trying to bring it back around to our topic here, balancing the action and the quiet moments, if you focus too much on a supporting character or a subplot, you can shift that needle too far to the quiet side inadvertently. And then it's not even about the content of the scene. It's just about that focus. Where's it going? So that's another way we can kind of get off our mark.
Yeah, it's a good macro way of stepping back, isn't it? If you're revising your own work, or if you're editing somebody else's, then to step back and think, okay, why is this not picking up for me? And looking at, is there one way to do it is to look at what's the balance of the rising and falling scenes, I guess, and who they're attributed to.
Definitely, and it's always easier to see this stuff in other people's work, because you aren't creating it. You aren't, you can say, oh, this is missing or this is off balance, because you aren't stuck in your own headspace as the creator. So
that's right. Yeah. Where are they? They're just floating in space having this conversation. No, they're in a spaceship. Can't you see it? It's
right. Yeah, it's right here. They are. What's wrong with you? Yeah,
it's obvious.
Yes. Definitely. All right. Final thoughts on balancing action and quiet moments?
Action can be also things that is dialogue. I mean, between characters. I mean, an argument to me, in my mind, is action really in some way, shape, or form. So we're not necessarily always talking about the throwing fists and the shooting, or the fugitives on the run.
Right.
But anything that's intense, I suppose, action-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. Action, there's a spectrum of it. And we often say that while we're using all of the, fistfights and car chases as examples because they're just so easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because, in romance, action
active.
is considered something quite different.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. All right, that's it for us this week. Please head over to Facebook and the Storyworks Writers Facebook group and ask us questions, give us comments, let us know how you're doing balancing action and non-action in your writing. Hey guys, the Structure of Story is now open. This is a Storyworks Fiction nuts and bolts course, and it's all about structure. Because often structure isn't taught. People assume it's just a natural byproduct of writing. Like, if you write a story, you'll intuitively know how long to make your scenes, where to place chapter breaks, and how to maximize the effects of dramatic or comedic action. But that really isn't true. Yes, literature is an art form, but like all other art forms, it springs from a definite working knowledge of craft. By learning the mechanics of story structure, you'll be able to identify the key elements of your story, shape them to increase your story's desired effect on your readers, and turn craft concepts into tools that you have at your disposal whenever you sit down to write. You can find out more about the structure of story and preview 2 of the modules, including 3.2, which is all about chapters, at storyworksfiction.com. This course is open, it's live, it's ready to enroll. Head over to storyworksfiction.com, get the preview, and I'll see you in the classroom. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.